everyone, and welcome back to this next episode of our bi-weekly report. The new issue of the Tank Encyclopedia magazine is now out. If you want to read fantastic articles about the German Jagdtiger, American heavy tank T-29, Danish HTK-16, the Schneider CA in Italian service, or the Northrop Delta project planes, we highly recommend you check it out. It is available on Amazon in Kindle format for $4.10, so it is definitely a great price for its contents. For our archive segment, we'll have a read through some minutes of two meetings between the British Ministry of Supply, the Chief Inspector of Electrical and Mechanical Equipment, and the War Office in late 1944. These stated that Lieutenant Colonel H.W. Fulton of the Ministry of Supply raised the issue of the difficulty he found during his visit on the continent to obtain from units an approximate number of any precise defects, as, for example, heavy oil consumption on Austin 4x4. The chairman stressed that, without exact information, the Ministry of Supply found it impossible to influence makers to make immediate modification. Some of the participants stated that they were fully aware of this difficulty, but they felt that they had taken all the steps possible to procure any information required. The Ministry of Supply's difficulties were fully appreciated by the War Office, and they did their utmost to squeeze whatever information they could from units in the field. What does this all mean? It means problems in the field were not, despite 4 years of war, being communicated very efficiently back to the people who were in charge and had the ability to fix them. Worse, the War Office was running a war while not really knowing how the vehicles it had authorized into service were actually doing in combat. Normandy happened on June 6th, and the earliest accounts that Jeremy Rosenblad, who supplied this information, found on the landings post-operation are about July 1944. With actual details showing up in late August and early September at the War Office. Actual commentary on vehicles on the beaches don't show up until at least October through December 1944. For our book segment, we will have a look at the second Pioneers of Armour book about Colonel R.E.B. Crompton by our very own Andrew Hills. By World War I, Colonel Crompton had already been in the Army for decades, first in India, then in South Africa. A technically gifted man, Crompton built his own steam-powered vehicle as a young man and had pioneered steam-powered road haulage in India. During the Boer War, he helped to counter the work of Boer commandos who had attacked and damaged the vulnerable rail system supporting the British forces, and had been engaged in work on mechanical traction for artillery. In between India and South Africa, he had managed to create a successful engineering company in the UK, and post-Boer War, he continued this work as well as work for the Road Board on experimental traction. By the time of World War I, Crompton was a colonel and a world-renowned expert on both electrical matters and road traction, with his own ideas for how the military could move men and guns around. This was the background for one of the original members of the Landship Committee, the body which developed the first functional tanks the world had ever seen and which laid the groundwork for a modern maneuver-based mechanized war. Without his pioneering work, the British would have been beaten to the use of armored mechanical tracked vehicles by the French, and the Army continued to suffer its horrendous losses with no solution to end the war in sight. Tanks, as they became known, helped to bring this devastating war to a conclusion, but like so many technical developments, the origins are oversimplified or simply misunderstood. Colonel Crompton played a key role in the development of this important weapon system, and has, until recently, received very little credit or attention for his early and crucial work. This time around in gaming news, we're looking at the just-released Update 4.004 for the IL-2 Great Battle Simulation, which brings with it a series of general improvements and changes to the sim, as well as a new vehicle for the Tank Crew module. First, the general changes. The Rideland map for the Operation Bodenplatte module has received some visual and gameplay improvements. The visual tweaks to the river and canal banks, and 13 new airfields being introduced to give map makers and pilots greater flexibility when it comes to landing, resupply, and taking off. Various AI improvements have been made, improving the visual model of the T-70 and tweaking the general capabilities of the AI vehicles and aircraft to make them less prone to fatal errors and more of a threat to the player. For armored vehicles, the loss of a loader is now more of a hindrance to the player, or AI, greatly increasing the amount of time it takes to reload the main gun or coaxial armament. The effect of the exhaust fan in the various player-controlled vehicles is now modeled. with the visual effect of propellant gases being reduced while the fan is off, and the time taken to vent the turret depending on whether the fan is operational or not. Finally, along with a whole host of other minor improvements, the main meat of the update, the Panzer V Aufs die Panther, the penultimate German vehicle planned for the module, and arguably one of the most famous vehicles of the Kursk campaign, needing little introduction for many people, although often the subject to a lot of misinformation as a result of its place in the spotlight. As always, more information on the update can be found at the link in the description, which will take you to the IL-2 news page, with more details about the new airfields and other improvements that have come to the sim in this latest update. And now onto our new articles. First up, we have an article on the Renault R35 in Yugoslav service. In the early 1930s, Yugoslavia started to reform its cavalry divisions by adding armor support. In order to accomplish this, Yugoslavia began negotiating with France to receive modern armor, having already received Renault's NC and FT tanks from France in the past. Eventually, in 1940, France agreed to sell and deliver 54 R-35 tanks to Yugoslavia, just before the German invasion of the West. The Renault R-35 was designed in the early 30s to replace the older Renault FT, and while it featured decent protection with its 40mm cast armor, it was slow and poorly armed with the same 37mm gun that was mounted on the FT. Upon arrival in Yugoslavia, the Battalion of Fighting Vehicles was divided into two battalions, with the 2nd Battalion receiving the new R-35 tanks, while the 1st Battalion was equipped with the older FT and M28 tanks. In March of 1941, the 2nd Battalion of Fighting Vehicles participated in the military coup of Belgrade, with the intent of keeping Yugoslavia out of the Axis powers. While the coup succeeded, it also led to Axis forces attacking Yugoslavia in April. While some parts of the 2nd Battalion were deployed against Croatian rebels with decent success, other elements that faced German panzer forces were captured or destroyed. During the German occupation, the surviving R-35 tanks were used by German occupation units to combat the Yugoslavian resistance movements until the end of the war. By the end of October 1944, losses and breakdowns had reduced the number of R-35 tanks to 6, with only one being functional. The independent state of Croatia also utilized captured equipment, including at least one R-35 tank, and the partisan and Chetnik resistance forces also used captured tanks, including an R-35. After the war, it is unknown exactly how many R-35s had survived, but it is believed that no examples have survived to this day. This article was written by Marko Pantelic and was illustrated by David Beausoleil. For our second article, we present the Norwegian NM-116 Panzerjäger. After the Second World War, the United States sent Norway 130 M24 Chaffee light tanks as a part of the military aid program. However, by the 1960s, it became clear that in order to face tanks commonly fielded by the USSR, such as the T-54-55 or the T-62, the Chaffee would need an upgrade. The first prototype of this upgrade, designated NM-116, would be presented in 1973. The twin Cadillac 220 horsepower petrol engine was replaced with the Detroit diesel 6V53T two-stroke engine, and it was equipped with a turbocharger. Diesel engines were a better choice for the cold environment of Norway, and while it produced 260 horsepower and more torque, the speed was slowed to 47 kilometers an hour. In addition, larger fuel tanks increased the operational range from 160 kilometers to 300 kilometers. The hydromatic transmission was also replaced with the Allison MT650-653 gearbox. In regards to the armament, the obsolete 75mm gun was replaced with the French D925 low-pressure 90mm gun. The gyro stabilizer had to be removed due to space constraints, but the original concentric recoil system was retained. This gun could fire 3 different ammunition types: high explosive anti-tank, high explosive, and smoke, and all 3 rounds were fin stabilized. The coaxial Browning M1919 30 cal was replaced with the Browning AN M3 50 cal, reportedly recycled from F-86 Sabre fighter jets. The roof-mounted Browning M2 HB50 was kept, but the bow 30 cal was removed, which allowed for more ammunition stowage. Other changes included a laser rangefinder on top of the barrel, 8 smoke launchers, new radios and intercom systems, new tracks, new shock absorbers, and a new internal heating system. Over its service lifetime, the NM-116 also experienced other upgrades such as a T-muzzle brake, a new sprocket wheel, a grunt phone, and more equipment racks. After trials, a total of 72 of the M24s were converted by October of 1976, and it would fill the role of tank destroyer and light reconnaissance tank. After servicing for 18 years, the NM-116 was retired in 1993, with most of them being scrapped. Known survivors exist in Rogaland Krigshistorisk Museum in Norway, the Rennes military camp, and in the Musée de Binz in France. This article was written by Mark Nash with assistance from Stephen Hohenvag and details from Dagrun Nilsson, who is a former NM-116 commander from the Panzerverein Brigade Nord. Illustrations are produced by Arya Anarga with funds from our Patreon. Other articles we have published these past 2 weeks include Jalix Armored Vehicle, Landsverk Armored Motorcycles, the Somavent Motor Guzzi, and the Grasshopper Light Tank. That's all for this report. Make sure to follow our website. We'll be releasing new articles on the regular. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or Reddit. If you use Discord, there's a link to our community server in the description. And if you would like to help us continue to develop and expand, consider donating to our Patreon. All the funds will be used to help us enhance and design new articles and features for you. I'm Krager, and until next time, keep us in your sights.